Well, I think we'll get started. Good morning, everybody. Appreciate all your time. I'm Scott Bergeron. I'm one of the founders, president at Pstrax. We're real excited this morning to have a special guest. I know you guys have been looking at Pstrax or you're using Pstrax, but I've actually been working with Chief Jim Gaboury for 4 years or more right now, and his team, how they took a large department, paperless, essentially with the Pstrax platform. So I'm gonna turn most of this over to Jim, but we want to make this real interactive and real informal. We appreciate all your time. If you guys have questions, feel free to pop into the chat. We'll take some breaks every now and then. But essentially what we've done, and Jim can tell you a little bit about the size and scope of what we've done, but essentially we took a metro department from doing lots and lots of check sheets. They've got probably 2 pages of check sheets that they've accumulated and eliminated with the use of Pstrax. But typically most of our departments are small to medium size, but we also serve cities like St. Louis, Miami-Dade, Canadian Pacific Railroad. Even in Australia, we do the Flight for Life out there, the Royal Canadian or Royal Flying Doctors out that way. So we do large and small, but primarily what we'd like to do is make sure that we build it for you specifically. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Jim Gaboury.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for attending. Again, my name is Jim Gaboury. I'm a Deputy Fire Chief with the City of San Diego Fire Rescue Department. I've been here for 32 years. My current position is the Logistics Deputy Chief, which I've been in this position for 6 years now. So going back to the history of this, and I'm going to share my screen for the presentation, and we'll just go start talking about some of this stuff. Bear with me for a second here. So a little bit of history on the San Diego Fire Rescue Department. We are approximately 331 square mile department. We have 50 fire stations, but 69 facilities, 1,300 personnel, and over 400 apparatus that we manage for this. And the history of where we were at is everything was paper, and we were losing equipment. We were missing tracking of repairs and notifications and everything else. And it was imperative that we started looking for something to help us do a better job of tracking, to save money, to be more efficient, and so on and so forth. What we had before Pstrax was a bit of a hybrid system. The majority of our checks were done on paper, and then they were submitted via fax machine, scanned, emailed, or they were left in a book that were on an apparatus, or just multiple things. And then we had Excel spreadsheets, as well as an outdated asset managing tracking system that actually needed to be upgraded at the time. And so we needed to update the database at the same time as going paperless. And my battalion chief at the time, Matt Nielsen, who is basically the tip of the spear for this transition, he approached me with the paperless goal back in 2016. And at the same time, I was experiencing the asset managing tracking issues that we were having on our equipment side. And so I challenged him to basically find us a program that could do all these things, go paperless, as well as track our assets without going to 3 or 4 different types of programs. And we actually started this process with a couple of different other programs that we looked at. We even started a beta test with one of them and before we found Pstrax. And then once we eventually came into contact with Pstrax and Scott's team, we were kind of bouncing back and forth. We were waiting for development. We had a lot of lofty goals of things that we wanted to accomplish with this program. And let me advance my slide here. There it is. So we had a lot of lofty goals that we wanted for this program. And again, one of them was implement the closed loop internet accessible program for our crews to report discrepancies and issues or needs. And again, that was a cloud-based system that we could access from any platform. And that had to do with iPhones, iPads, and desktops, which we have iPhones and iPads on our fire apparatus, and obviously we have desktops in the fire stations. And so it was very important that we could use any one of those platforms to access the Pstrax site. And again, ultimately it was to try to go paperless and replace paper forms and routinely complete and filed away and never be seen again. And some of those things that, we had to purge after 3 years or 7 years, depending on what they were for. We wanted to start eliminating that kind of stuff and having a better history of tracking that kind of stuff. And also with the database system that Pstrax provides, we were able to go back for a long ways to track that type of history on some of those things. So it's very important for us. Satisfy various department, city agencies and reporting requirements. So one of the things that we did when we went paperless was encompassing other city departments, such as our fleet division, as well as our facilities division, and including our dispatch center. So we had to get buy-in from them to go with this system to actually incorporate it, because the notifications for an apparatus check that we did on Pstrax would then notify actually our mechanics in the fleet division, and then they would incorporate that and then send out a mechanic to do the repairs. Same thing with our fleet division, our facilities division, with our 69 facilities. If somebody submitted that they had a water leak, it would then go to our facility staff, and then they would dispatch somebody out there to repair the water leak. So we got real-time responses and notifications with the Pstrax platform. So it was fantastic. We wanted to track issues directly with the apparatus facilities and SCBAs and assets. And again, with these things, and we wanted for discrepancies, delayed discrepancies. So one of the goals was, if we couldn't get to it right away or wasn't an emergency, that it was still in the system that you could see with an alert that we could track and deal with at a later time, because we had higher priorities to deal with. And again, capture the data for all the paper forms and track the trends and things like that. Instant download data for like PPE and things like that. It was imperative for us to have these types of systems in place to do a better job for not only us as management and the logistics staff, but also the firefighters in the fire stations. Again, improve accountability and equipment tracking was imperative for us. We were losing tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment on an annual basis for the lack of accountability and tracking. And with this system, it allowed us to do periodic checks and tracking to go back to when it was something there, or we could pinpoint when it was missing or on a particular incident, and or did it get moved to another apparatus, so on and so forth. So it really did provide us a really good tracking mechanism for our equipment. Provide instant documentation. We pull up our documentation anywhere we're at. So we could be on a wildland strike team in Northern California, and we could pull up the history on our apparatus for checks. If we were having another mechanic from a different agency working on our fire apparatus, we could pull up all our checks and our information on the phone or on a tablet and provide that to that mechanic to help us out with any of that stuff. Obviously, training links that can be put into there. You have the ability to download pictures, which has made it really good for our facilities and fleet folks by downloading a picture of where the damage is or what the issue is. And a picture tells 1,000 words, and makes it just that much easier for us to determine those types of things. And again, I can't emphasize it enough, track issues and send real-time notifications. We were able to get these types of things immediately attached to an email thread that went to the appropriate people instantaneously once you press submit. And that got the ball rolling 10 times faster than it ever did back in the paper forms. And it just made our life much more efficient. And reduce the repeat reporting known issues. A lot of times during turnovers in the morning for fire crews, they were not, some information didn't always get passed along to the other crew. By putting this stuff into Pstrax, it's automatically there. So if something did get missed in the morning turnover, all I had to do is go to Pstrax and they could look it up and say, and find out what those discrepancies or issues were and can address them and keep continuing with addressing those later on down the road. So just a few statistics on some of the things that we do. Again, crews log on an average over 7,000 checks a day just in our fleet and facilities. So that's quite a bit. We have 25 or more alert discrepancies set every day. And again, they're cleared. So we've got it to the point where when our facility staff or fleet staff go out there, they do the repair, they have access on their tablets or phones to, once the problem has been repaired or fixed, they can send an update, close it out, and it's been done. Or they can add a comment to it and say, you know, we're going to be back in 4 hours to fix this later on, or whatever the case may be. And so it's been very good to have those real-time updates, even when the process is ongoing. PPE has been fantastic. We do over 30,000 checks on PPE completed each year during our annual PPE inspection. And that has been monumental because the best part about it is the database. I can go in and forecast my needs for PPE replacements 10 years down the road now that I have all this information in the database. I can plug in how many structure coats and pants I need to replace in fiscal year 2025 by just doing a query on the Pstrax database, and it'll tell me exactly how many coats are expiring in that year based on the information that is provided. So it's been fantastic. So take a stop there. So one of the things that we did, again, we were trying to format was replace paper forms. We replaced over 35 paper forms into the Pstrax format. And that goes anywhere from a pre-trip inspection for a fire apparatus to a monthly fire station inspection for a battalion chief, to tracking generator usage logs. We've PPE inspections, pump tests, you name it. We've pretty much incorporated anything that has to do with the apparatus or the facility. We converted it into Pstrax for tracking purposes, and has made it seamless in that process of the paper. All the information is the same, it's just in a different format now, and it's much easier to access. And again, we can access anywhere. And again, more forms that we replaced. Some of the forms that we did not replace because of, depending on the situation, again, is fuel dispensing logs. We have fuel tanks in the majority of our fire stations, and so our fire personnel are not the only ones using these. Other city staff use these fuel tanks. So to have that on Pstrax, and not all city personnel have access to Pstrax, only the ones that we interact with. So the fuel forms are the ones that we weren't able to incorporate. And then also a radio alias database, which again, we have multiple departments that we dispatch and use that alias database. So these other departments right now aren't integrated with that. Now, eventually, some of these surrounding departments that we dispatch are moving to the Pstrax format. And eventually, if all the personnel in what we call our metro zone move into that database, that Pstrax format, we may be able to move that radio alias database to that format because everybody will be on the same platform potentially. So those are kind of the benefits of using Pstrax with our surrounding departments. So with that, I'm gonna stop for just a second, see if anybody has any questions to this point. Scott, if you got anything to add it.
Sure. I appreciate the presentation. I was watching the news last night and they were interviewing somebody and all of a sudden their phone rang and I was laughing at them. I said, wow, that's that wasn't allowed 10 years ago. I apologize for my phone. So anyway, I wanted to congratulate you on what you guys have done so far. And I think the biggest thing to look at, and I mentioned it a couple times, it's not just for the management side of it, but the crews themselves, as far as, there's several different, modules built into the system, everything from truck checks to PPE to SCBA bottles and packs and airflows. And there's a lot that goes on. Not everybody wants everything at the start. And sometimes I know you guys start off with like literally 5 out of 6 modules, I believe at the time. And now it's 6 out of 7. I think the only thing that is been pulled back was a controlled substance just because you're not in that mode yet. But how did you take the rollouts? How did the crews take the rollouts at the beginning? I mean, overall, did you start with one module and then added in PPE, or did you kind of jump in the deep end on this?
And that's a great question because that was actually my next point to discuss, was working with Chief Nielsen, and he is very techie and computer, and so working with Pstrax for him was very natural for him, and he has a very strong computer background, and so me not so much. So when he's explaining these things to me, I go, okay, I'm the average firefighter. So now we need to talk about how we're going to roll this system out to the average firefighter, not somebody that is as advanced as you are. So I go, let's take a step back. Let's do a phased approach and roll these things out 1 or 2 at a time. So we're not overwhelming our staff and personnel, and we want them to get used to it, to the system, and then we would start to incorporate. So ultimately, again, we're using 6 out of the 7 modules, but we started off with 1. We started off with the PPE module. As we were doing our annual PPE inspection, we collected all the data from that, and then we started incorporating that, and we brought that information back to Pstrax. And you guys were monumental in taking all that data and putting it into the database for us. So that saved us a ton of data entry. But then once all that information was in there, it was easier for us to track it from that point. And then we started working with our staff to make sure they updated and double checked their information to make sure it was appropriate so they would get in there and start using it. And during that time when we were doing the initial PPE rollout, we worked with your team to take all those 35 plus forms and incorporate those into the Pstrax format. And so then that way we could get ready to roll out our next 2 modules, which was the fleet maintenance module as well as the facilities maintenance module. And so once those forms were incorporated, and then we had about 2 or 3 months with the PPE format, we then rolled out phase 2, which was again the fleet and the facilities modules, which was a lot more intuitive because it was daily that they were accessing these things versus the PPE module was only as needed and when we were doing the annual PPE inspection. So once we hit the fleet and the facilities module, we took a step back for a while because that took some training. We also had to provide some online training, which we had fantastic modules that we were able to incorporate into Pstrax as well at the same time. So when somebody was going through a Pstrax module and working through it, there was the ability to actually go back and see a training right within the module, so they could familiarize themselves and make sure that they were doing it appropriately. Now, we were proactive and we sent all this information out in advance before the module ever got released. Chief Nielsen put these training sessions together that we posted on our learning management system, and to make sure everybody was up to speed before we implemented this thing. And again, ultimately our goal is not to overwhelm our staff. So that was very important to us, and kind of ease into it. And this was a year-long process that we did. So we just didn't start dumping on them one after another and just say, okay, here it is, take it. So yeah, by the time we got up to the 6th module, and even the 6th module was almost 2 years later, the asset tracking module that was the last one we implemented. So I mean, this was a great process for our folks to just kind of let it kind of absorb it over time. We didn't, we obviously knew we had some learning curves, and we had some growing pains with this process, and getting buy-in from not only our rank and file staff, but again, getting buy-in from our fleet department, our facilities department, and making sure that they were able to address and work with the program itself, because they had direct access to it. So, I mean, they weren't necessarily the benefits or the end users of it, but they were incorporated into it. And so that took some time as well. And so now that we've been up and running for the better part of 3.5 years, we've got a much more seamless daily routine with this thing. And we still have some growing pains, and we still have some issues that we are working through. But those are minor compared to what we were dealing with before we started with this program.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. I don't know if there's other questions that have come in or not, Liz, but the one thing, in fact, I was a little bit surprised. I didn't know you guys had started with just PPE at that point, but I do realize that, and throughout, our history, we've got a lot of people that have started with, they'll typically do 4 modules, but just like you said, this is not an overnight magic bullet. This is really a process that we learned early on. We've been doing this since 2009, that you need everybody's buy-in at it, but you don't necessarily need to jump in the deep end. It's nicer, if you can get the buy-in from the start with modules like the vehicle module or the station module, those fleet and facilities. I also noticed you guys recently with the critical assets module, you guys have everything from rooftops to appliances to day rooms to chairs and things like that. So there's a lot that are in there. But again, what we've learned is there's no 2 departments alike. And we started off with Blackhawk Fire Department, single station up here in Colorado. They're still with us. Hopefully they're on today. But what's nice is what they do is different than what San Diego does. It's different from what our listeners are doing. And so one of the big things that the Chief was talking about was the fact that we build everything for you. So literally you hand us over what you have, and we have a team that actually builds it for you and brings it back. And then we administrate, or if there's anything that you're adding or subtracting, you can do everything we can do with an administrative password, but we'll take that on for you as well. So it's not just here's your login, here's your password, here's the button on the back end of the rest of the, the all-in-ones or whatever. But we want to make sure that it's done right, it's done for what you guys really need. So as far as hardware and things like that, you mentioned Toughbooks, and do the guys use a Toughbook or a iPad or something like that on the rigs, or do they use their own phones, or how does that work?
So that's the beauty of your guys' system, because it's cloud-based and it can be accessed anywhere with a cell or internet signal. We do provide our fire captains and engineers on the apparatus with an iPhone, and every fire apparatus also does have an iPad for emergency medical documentation. So we put that quick link on all those phones and iPads on the apparatus, so it can be used anywhere. And then we also have it in the desktop in the fire station itself. So all the mediums that we have for the fire service, they have access to Pstrax on it. So that really makes it seamless. Like I said, in my old age, I prefer the iPad so I can see it better versus my phone. So that's why we have it on both.
You can blow it up too.
Exactly. And
I got a few years on you too, so I can blow that thing right up and see it, which is kind of nice, especially if I'm forced to use my phone on a demo outside. I blow it up and actually read it. So that's true. You can also have multiple people. The reason we kept it cloud-based versus app-based or mobile app is simply because we want to be able to have multiple people on one rig at one time doing the checks. We know that's a fairly standard process, is having more than one person. It's not just the engineer in a lot of cases. It's the two firefighters behind and the officer as well. So they can all do things, and it'll record who did what at what time and the whole thing. So Liz, do you have a question? I see you over there.
We do. We have a few questions, actually. The first one is going back to the training and the onboarding of the teams and crews. Chief, can you talk a little bit about training them to use the system? Did you guys put on a training class with just your personnel? How did Pstrax help you in helping everybody to learn how to use the system? What best practices, what did you learn and find out as you were starting to get people to use the system physically in your firehouse?
So the best part about this was before I became the logistics chief, I was the training chief. So I have a little bit of background in, trying to train and motivate our personnel and find the best way to provide them the information. And again, that's why it was a phased approach as we rolled this out. So what we did is we first started off with just a bulletin, just an informational bulletin describing what Pstrax is about, why we were using it, and what were the benefits from it. So we provided that information, and with that, we talked about the phased approach of how we were going to address it. And within that, we did put in a video link that was provided to us by Pstrax as just a general overview of the site and how to use it. So we gave them that information as a as an initial kind of introduction to Pstrax. And then from that point is when we started rolling out the module training. And then we did one module at a time that we provided the training with, that we had a very specific video that was, again, was provided by Pstrax on how to walk through the module, how to enter data, how to extract data, so on and so forth. And we did that one at a time. We provided that on our learning management platform, that it went to all personnel. And as well, it was included in the Pstrax site and / module that they could access while they were actually in the module itself. So to me, we hit it from all angles. And again, by taking our time and doing it, we felt like we hit the best options for these folks to learn and absorb it. And again, we weren't kind of, for lack of a better term, rushing them through it. We just took our time to make sure they absorbed one module at a time or two modules at a time, and not do it all at one time. So it was, again, a phased approach, a very long term. And again, we did have some growing pains. We do have some people that are computer challenged, and we had to work through that as well. But overall, we've had great success with the format that we chose.
Awesome. And kind of piggybacking on that question, another one we had come through. Did you find any issues with compliance from the people using the system or expected to use the system? And was there anything anybody found to be cumbersome or unnecessary about the system that would make it that they just didn't want to use it? Obviously, we want it to be easy, but from real life experience, can you speak a little bit to that?
Oh, certainly. I mean, our first compliance concerns is, again, with our rank and file. I had to meet with our union officials, and because this may be a change in working conditions, and we had to get their buy-in, and we had to talk about the benefits from it. And was this an increase in working conditions, or was it just a change in the format? And ultimately, in the long term of things, it was just a change in the format. we went from a paper system to a paperless system. So we weren't adding any additional work to their daily routine. We just provided a different platform for it. And so that was kind of convincing. Once we had our union support, and again, about the benefits of it, they were in. And so then they supported on their end. And then obviously, like I mentioned earlier, we're always going to have some folks that are kind of a little resistant to change. This is the way we've done this for years. Trust me, I've been around a long time, and I've seen that for multiple generations in the fire service, and understand it. And it's, this is how we progress. This is how we get better. And just because tradition goes long and deep in the fire service, and we understand that, but some things are meant to change because to make it better and safer for our firefighters. And that was ultimately the reason for this change that we tried to push. It was better accountability for the equipment and the apparatus and the facilities to make their day better and safer. And so that's kind of the message we sold, and eventually we got buy-in. There's always going to be that one person that we have, and again, a large department of ours, we're never going to be able to make everybody happy, but we've got pretty good consensus across the board right now.
That's great to hear. I have one final question, and then we can continue on. Because Pstrax is a cloud-based platform, this individual would like to know, did you run into any connectivity issues, Wi-Fi or internet issues when using Pstrax that would have prevented you from being able to conduct a check or finish a check?
So the best part about for us, we have the ability to connect to Wi-Fi as well as cell signal with our iPhones and our iPads on our fire apparatus. So if we weren't getting Wi-Fi connection, we had the ability to get cell connection. So very rarely, I want to say in the 3+ years that we've been with Pstrax, I don't remember ever having any real connection issues with the cloud and or any of our resources from that point. Doesn't mean it hasn't happened. I just haven't heard of anything long-term that has caused any issues.
I'll speak to that too, Chief. When we first started this, I think back maybe 2012, 2013, we went to do a demo here in town, a rollout, and all of a sudden on the back side of the ladder truck in the far side of the bay, they couldn't get the Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi was really good in the training facility. It wasn't as good in the bay on the back side. And as soon as we started doing that, we thought, oh man, we're done. And about three of the firefighters pulled out their hotspots at the time out of their pocket, popped them up, and they were going. So the one nice thing about the first responder industry as a whole is everyone's very resourceful and has backups to backups. So we kind of had different choices and a lot of times with the mobile apps too, you're limited on what you can actually do in there. And with all the different pieces of equipment and inventories that we're doing in there, we didn't want to have to pick and choose and basically have two different databases going forward. So no, that's what we found early on, and now it's gotten better and better and better. Just like all of us, as far as our home systems go and Wi-Fi and stuff, it's just gotten better. It's become fairly commonplace to do that. Also on your phone, it does have an icon on your phone, so the guys don't have to log into a website. It is the website, but it's a shortcut to it, and it sizes based on the device you've got. So what you mentioned before that, and we talked a little bit yesterday too, you had some other programs before that you were beta testing and stuff. What made you ultimately start looking elsewhere after that, or those experiences?
So, and again, when we started this process back in 2016, again, Chief Nielsen was the lead on this. We had a asset managing system that was antiquated and needed to be updated. And so when we started this process looking at the different formats, we had kind of looked at multiple ones before we even knew about Pstrax. We actually started a beta test with one of them. And again, we have lots of ideas. Again, being a large department, we have lots of needs. And so we started working with this other company to try to develop these modules And again, asset tracking, PPE, SCBAs, so on and so forth. And they had really only had a paperless system that they were going with, and not really an asset tracking system for, again, PPE and SCBAs, which were very important to us to make sure we're managing those. And then, so when we started that beta test, we weren't getting the progression that we were hoping. We thought they were going to start making some modules for us. And after about 8 months to a year, we weren't getting any progression. And we had kind of signed a temporary contract with them. We came across Pstrax, and you guys had already had these modules established. Once we figured that out and we started kind of doing the math, and you guys have already had 85% of what we were looking for built, and this other company had 20%. And so we severed ties with that company, and really, once we got on board with Pstrax, it was a very quick transition because you guys were providing the information that and the platforms that we needed right then. And you guys were able to tailor those platforms to our needs. And you guys continue to do that, which is why we have such a good working relationship. We just rolled out that asset managing tracking system. And again, that is going to be tracking when I switch out mattresses and when I switch out refrigerators in the fire stations and things like that. That's how we're going to track all that kind of stuff. And that is going to make my job as somebody that forecasts the budget down the road much easier, because if we put these things on a replacement plan, I can easily forecast that out and let my Department of Finance know that I'm going to need so many refrigerators, so many this, that in the following years, and we can just put that on a schedule, and it makes them much happier, so they know what their forecasted budget needs to be. So, I mean, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but just the benefits that this program provides us really hits on multiple levels, not just the end user down at the firefighter level.
No, it's funny you mentioned the refrigerators. I had Littleton Fire here. They're not part of South Metro, but Littleton had set an alert at one of their stations here close by to the office, and they kept getting a gray or a dark charcoal colored ice cube in their refrigerator like every other day. And they finally figured out somebody had put the charcoal cartridge in backwards or whatever it was, but it kept spitting out like one gray ice cube. And so they thought it was pretty funny to see that. One thing we didn't cover a whole lot, but I know especially with as many layers and as many areas of expertise, from PPE to SCBA to power saws and things like that, the alert module kind of is kind of a key component that we really didn't cover in this webinar. We're not really getting very deep in the weeds. We're not showing you the platform or anything of that sort. I'm assuming that most of you have seen it. If you haven't, we'll talk about that. But how did you and this might be a question for Chief Nelson, and we've actually got your platform and stuff videoed beforehand too. We'd be glad to share that with others. But how did you set up, and was the alert set up to where, I mean, obviously Chief Nelson or you guys aren't the only people receiving alerts. Did you set it up to where each individual module is going to a certain department, or do you know that depth of it? I know that I can kind of talk with Matt about that, but how many different recipient areas do you have for alerts? Is that something that, I mean, it's got to be dozens.
Yes. And so just on the logistics side, so we have three email distribution lists that are attached to the fleet module. So we have the SDFD fleet distribution list that all the mechanics are attached to it, certain personnel here in the fire logistics area. And so when that alert goes out, it goes to all those people's inboxes. Same thing with the facilities. When I have a number of fire rescue staff on there, as well as facility staff that are on that, when you send an alert that you need a new light bulb in a fire station or whatever the case may be, you send that alert out and it goes to all the personnel. and it comes up to us, and then we schedule it right away, or we send out a light bulb and you replace it, or whatever the case may be. But we have a distribution list attached to that, as well as our equipment center for PPE, saws, so on and so forth. So we cover the majority of those things just with those 3 email distribution lists.
Okay. Okay.
And so, I mean, and some of those distribution lists are attached to multiple modules. So like the equipment distribution list is attached to the SCBA and the PPE module.
Okay. And like you said before, we had kind of an 85 to a 25%, difference in what we had already built for you guys. And again, this is one thing we've learned from larger metro agencies, is the fact that you guys have real specialty asks. So how do we do this? And so literally we've got a build team, a development team in-house. Nothing's farmed out. I mean, everything. This was a software program that's designed to be a service as a software, not just the other way around. So it's not just handed off to you. Once you decided, and over the years too, we've also, like you said, if there's an idea that makes sense, we go into development and figure out a way to make things happen that are going to work for across the board. It's not like a yes for everything, but it's certainly, we want to make sure that we keep evolving. And just like our inventories module, and just like our assets module, critical assets, these are all asks that we've taken from clients around the country, now around the world, which is pretty neat. So when you finally decided you wanted to do this, and this is kind of the big question, how did you get it through the proper channels? I mean, we know you're San Diego, and we know California. We know California is a lot of bureaucracy. How did you get what you wanted, so to speak? If that's, I told you I wasn't going to throw you a softball. There's a good softball for you. But how did you do this? Because everybody wants to know, hey, if I want this now, how do I get it? What was your methodology, I guess, on that? So.
Well, and I think ultimately unfortunately, every municipality is going to be different in how you process this. First and foremost, I had to sell it up my chain of command to the fire chief to talk about where the benefits were going to come from and how this was going to help us save money, basically. And you want anybody's attention, how will it save you money? And again, about equipment accountability, the paper tracking, the efficiency of the whole system was kind of our selling points to the brass. And as soon as, I didn't have to spend a whole lot of time really selling this to my fire chief. And so he was very much on board. Where it came down to it is because this is a computer program and we are a large city, our city database, our city IT department is very conservative about allowing outside programs into our system, because once we allow that into the city system, there's a chance for corruption and things like that. So, and at the time, the city was not allowing cloud-based programs. They weren't approving cloud-based programs. Pstrax was one of the first cloud-based programs approved in the city IT system. And so we talked about, what we were talking about is there is no other option out there that the city could provide that they had that could do the things that Pstrax did. And once we kind of showed them this was the only system that really did what we wanted it to do and made it safer and more efficient and save the city money, we created what we call a sole source for this. And again, based off of that information, then I provided that up the chain of command and through the Department of Finance, and they approved that because, again, there was no other database system out there that had all the modules and the things that we needed except for Pstrax. And so that's why we went with the sole source. And so we eliminated the competitive bidding process out of it by going with the sole source.
Okay.
And that's kind of how we did it in a nutshell.
Sure. And admittedly, you're right. Every agency, every metro, every small department's got their own chain of command and things to walk through. And so I just wanted to relay the message on some of those things. We've had others that have piggybacked onto other contracts, or they've done, gone out and searched out and found that this does integrate all things operational, from controlled substance to critical assets to rig checks. I mean, it's not just a rig check app, so to speak. And that was kind of where there's lots of them that are out there, or at least some that are still just kind of in that mode. But we want to make sure that everybody's got the right stuff for what they want and how they want to go with it. So you talked about the dollars and saving the dollars, and that's a huge thing, because I told you yesterday, there's a lot of people that are just doing a paper check saying this is really cheap. Paper itself is cheap, but it's probably the least efficient and most expensive way of doing operational checks and keeping track of inventories and expiration dates and things of that sort that we don't even didn't even cover in any depth in this webinar. But the point is, no matter what you're doing as far as a check system or operational asset management system, you're paying something, whether you're paying in time or you're paying in lost equipment or whatever it happens to be. So just you keep that in mind. We want to make sure we're as efficient as we can. We didn't build the software to sell it. We built it, obviously as a service to the fire service. My daughter's a fire medic here in Denver, and we started this at her department up when she was in Blackhawk. And so we wanted to make sure that this is something that really serves the people that it needs to serve. You guys have a lot of things on your plate, and I think I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, Chief. And is there any other questions, Liz, before we kind of break? Or anybody that's got questions, shoot them out to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Chief, you were getting into kind of the bonus parts of Pstrax, right? We help with the operations, we help with, the ability to get things done. But once you get that data into the system, what does it do for you? Can you talk a little bit about some of the reporting that you use, what you've found has been really helpful? Maybe there's something that was a surprise that you didn't think was going to be, an outcome of going digital. Can you speak a little bit to that?
So obviously trends in history, a lot of that can be accessed and downloaded from the Pstrax. Perfect example is we had just recently at one of our fire stations kept having a sewer backup. And so we went back on Pstrax, and for the past 3 years, we tracked how many times this sewer backed up over 3 years. And it came up to that we was backing up about once every 4 to 6 weeks. And it was backing up and causing a spill inside the station. And come to find out, after we did a little bit more investigation with a snake camera down the drain, the whole sewer drain was collapsed and broken from the fire station to the street. And so we ended up, by doing that trend and having them look at those trends that information was entered, we got the city facilities department out, and they ended up just last week dug it up and replaced it. And so we've solved that problem. That was one example on the facility side. On the equipment side, which was for me monumental, I just am working through doing a new contract for purchasing PPE for my firefighters. And I used the database from the PPE to go ahead and project 5 years in advance of where my PPE needed to be replaced, so I could forecast those funding numbers and put it in my contract and adjust for all that kind of stuff in the future. So I was able to come up with a bottom line 5-year forecast of how much money it was going to cost the city and to put into that contract. So just those two examples saved me a ton of time and research, and also increased the safety for our folks.
No, fantastic. No, I appreciate there's all kinds of different ways that different operations have talked. I've run across several that have taken when we were talking about PPE, where they can figure out exactly if it's 5 years out, replacing 20% of them each year and knowing which 20% need to be replaced. So you're not having to go to the board for like all the money for everything at one time. You've got it, you've got it built in, so it's amortized over many years. So you're not having to, like buy all the bottles or all the packs or all the, the helmets all at one time, that you can replace them, consecutive years. And it makes a big difference on what you're asking for and when you're asking for it. So I appreciate that very much. That's very helpful. And for those of you who, and again, if you've seen what we do as far as the big level or down in the minutia as far as the details go, we want to be able to help with that. If you haven't seen us, what we've done is this has been recorded, so you can actually, we can send you out the copy of this. We've also got Chief Matt Nilsson's webinar that he did some time back. It was probably a year ago or more, but he actually digs in exactly, so you can see all the depths of all the modules that they've done at San Diego. And just keep in mind, this is the big picture. This is the mansion version of this. So you don't have to worry about, when we watched the webinar, there was a spot where he was talking about 11,000 PPE checks that were undone yet. And I went, oh, great. But the reality was, he said there was 30,000, the week before. So the point is, it's all on a scale. We've scaled everything for departments from single stations up, volunteers up. Liz, is with, her husband's with a volunteer agency up in Minnesota. So anyway, we want to make sure that you guys are all, taken care of. And if you want to take a look at the demos, you can head to our website at pstrax.com. You can also, we will send out a copy of this recording as well as Chief Nelson's recording. If you want to see that list, we can give you a list of the checks that it replaced on here as well. Anything else that you guys can think of. If you got a question for me direct, Scott at Pstrax, Scott with 2 T's, pstrax.com. Everybody wants to know, if nobody asked it, what Pstrax stands for. Public Safety Tracking Solutions. So it's right there for you. Like I said, we built this to serve you guys. If there's anything that you guys have going forward, please let us know.